Welcome, everybody, and thank you so much for joining our event. We will be discussing if attending conferences in real life is worth the carbon footprint, a really interesting topic, and we've got some fantastic contributors here this evening. We'll be hearing from Andy Johnson from the University of Derby, Issy Stevens from the University of Birmingham, William Smith from the University of Cambridge, Richard Parncutt from Graz University, and Christine Bell, who works as an event facilitator. So all of these contributors will be sharing their expertise and experience of facilitating and attending conferences without flying. The reason that we are putting this event on is, of course, Flight Free UK is all about encouraging people to travel without flying. The main two parts of our work are about giving information on the climate impact of aviation, because in many cases, people simply don't know the impact of their flights. So it's hard to know that we should be avoiding them in order to reduce our emissions. But also giving the information and the inspiration for people to choose to travel by other means. So as we especially in terms of things like this, in terms of conferencing. So if we are able to travel without flying, we can still access the benefits of travel without the high carbon footprint. So that's what we're going to be exploring in this event. Is it possible to have those very worthwhile experiences to be able to access the benefits of conferencing and meetings and online and all those kinds of things? That it's good if those things happen in real life. We'll be exploring that a little bit, but also the practicalities of doing things in another way, how we can reduce emissions overall in terms of specifically looking at academic travel, but also this can relate to lots of other types of travel as well. So yes, I'm Anna Hughes, the director of Flight Free UK. Thank you very much for joining us. And I am going to hand over to our contributors now to give a short introduction to each of them. And then we'll move on to our discussion. So Andy Johnson, would you like to introduce yourself to everybody first?
Oh, okay, I've unmuted myself. Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for attending this meeting. I'm looking forward to hearing your perspectives, but just for the moment, I'll give you mine. I'm not going to particularly pass judgment on the actions that I've taken. That's something perhaps that will come up in the discussions after the speakers have said a few words, but I'll just tell you some of the things that I've done, who I am, and so on and so forth. I'm a former lecturer in geology at the University of Derby, but I've carried on with my academic research and really just almost as busy as I was while I was a lecturer. And I have a research grant now. And so, I'm very, very much involved with academic research still. Long before I retired, I decided that it was important to try and do my research in as green a way as possible. And that is really because of the nature of the research itself, which is very much into climate change. I'm looking at climate change in the relatively recent past, more specifically the most recent time in Earth history, when the world was as warm as it's going to become by the end of this century. And I'm looking at that specifically in the North Atlantic area. And I need to travel to places in the North Atlantic area to do field work and to visit institutions, museums, and so on and so forth. And at the same time, conferences go on, both on this side of the Atlantic and on the other side, which I need to attend. So I decided that I was going to try and do things by surface travel. And my first exercise in that was a trip to China by train from Derby in 2006. And I was planning to come back the same way, in other words, by train. But that proved impossible. So I had to come back by air. But that was, in fact, my last flight in 2006. And since then, I've done absolutely everything by surface travel in Europe, using the excellent train network, of course, both field work and conferences. But I've also done a lot of work in the US, the eastern US, the Atlantic side of the US, and I've done that by traveling by ship to the US, taking most times taking my bike with me and putting it on trains, and then cycling quite long distances when I get off the train. Mainly, I've done 6 round trips that way, and 5 of those have been by container ship. But the last trip, which I've only recently just come back from, had to be on the Queen Mary, because unfortunately it's no longer possible to travel as a passenger on container ships across the Atlantic. That's something that's came in with COVID. So unfortunately, I've had to do it a different way. It was quite an interesting experience, but I didn't want to particularly do it that way. So I'm sure this way of doing things immediately raises issues in your own mind about how green it is, how feasible it is, and so on and so forth. And those are the things that we might want to talk about later on. But let's just say for the moment that's how I've done things, both for purposes of doing my field research and also attending conferences on the other side of the Atlantic. More recently, of course.
Oh, sorry, Andy. We'll move on to the next person for introductions, if that's okay.
Anyway.
Thank you so much, and fascinating to hear about those transatlantic travels, especially. So, thank you, Andy. Issy, would you like to introduce yourself next?
Hey, hey everyone. I'm Issy. I'm a final year PhD student in Birmingham, and I'm studying or researching sustainable materials for batteries. So I did my first train trip for a conference in the summer of 2022, which was to Stockholm, and I wanted to see if it was possible, and it was. So since then I've been as far south as Madrid, and this year I actually went to southern Norway, and I took my bike with me for a 3-month internship. So
excellent.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you, Issy. William, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Hey, so I'm also a final year PhD student at the University of Cambridge, and my PhD is in like climate science, like modeling, like atmospheric modeling, that sort of thing. And so the first conference I ever went to was flying, like it was in the US, but it was that kind of made me reevaluate, like kind of think, like reflecting on that made me evaluate if I needed to do that at all. And then so since then I've only ever taken the train to conferences. So I've been to Vienna twice. You can go from Cambridge to Vienna in one day, which take this as a whole day, but you can do it. And then I've been to Barcelona as well. And any other trips I've gone on, I've just always taken a train. And I'd say I'm in the final year of my PhD now, so I'm not sure if I'll have any more conferences, but yeah.
Thank you, William. So is Richard here in the meeting? I didn't see his name on the attendees list. So Richard is supposed to be one of our other speakers, although based in Europe, the time zone might have got confused. But if not, that's okay. We'll go to Christine. So Christine, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
So I'm the different person because I'm not someone who goes to conferences. I'm someone who facilitates at conferences. So I get asked to go to conferences. And prior to 2020, I did a lot of travel, and I was questioning, a bit like William was questioning about using flights, but it was so complicated that I carried on flying. I've flown to India twice. I've gone to Austria. I've gone to my last flight ever was in February 2020, coming back from Poland into the midst of the pandemic. And then from that point onwards, we changed our whole model, because so my work as a facilitator is working with scientists and innovators, bringing them together to collaborate. And I think we all felt in our profession that this was impossible to do virtually, and you had to be in the same space. Therefore, flying was a necessity to get everyone globally to collaborate together. And obviously the pandemic changed all of our worlds. And for me, it opened a whole world of virtual facilitation. And I'm very good at it. My events are great and I enjoy it. I don't have to travel. And so I've actually made that into something that I do and really prefer to do. And when I get requests, I had a request the other day for somewhere in Qatar, and I was like, I really don't want, I can't even imagine how I'd get there. I don't want to go there. And I booted it to another consultancy company because I just thought I really can't get my head around that one. So my travel that I have done has been UK, and I have done travel to Maastricht, to Belfast, which is what I wrote for the Flight UK site. And I've also done a very easy trip from Leeds to Belgium. But it is from Leeds, which adds a different dimension to it. It's that extra bit. It's not living on the Eurostar terminal. So, yeah.
Thank you, Christine. And really good point there, because it is possible from all parts of the UK. So yeah, your perspective from Leeds is great. William, you're in Cambridge, so fairly close to London, but still it's that extra bit. Issy, Birmingham, Andy, Derby, so it's not always just South Coast people who can do this. Thank you, everybody, for your introductions. So for our audience and for everybody attending this event, if you would like to ask questions specifically to our contributors, then please do put them in the chat and we will come to as many questions as we possibly can at the end. We're going to start with our discussion though. So we'll be discussing some points for about 25 minutes and then we'll go to questions. So if you have something to ask, then it would be great to hear from you. If it's, as I said, if it's for a specific person, then please mention that in the chat, or if it's a general question, then we can put it to all of our contributors. So to start with, the first question I will ask is about the perception that professionals must travel in order to further their career. And this is very true in academia, but it's also true in lots of other professions. So it will be interesting to hear the different perspectives. Andy, as someone who is at the, I don't want to say end of your career.
Don't worry, I know what you're going to say.
But then William and Issy, who you're just starting out and you're at, in that kind of the PhD position. So Andy, would you like to go first?
It's quite actually relevant because you're absolutely right. I didn't need to do this to I didn't need to be visible in order, I was already well into my career when I started doing this. So, it wasn't a necessity in the sense of, putting myself in a position to get a job or anything like that. And actually, right at the outset, I was able to get some support from my university for doing this because they saw it as a way of, and it worked, of showing my university in a good light. And they actually gave me some money initially, but subsequently that dried up, and I did get at one stage a little bit of flack from a senior colleague for doing things in the way that I was doing it, namely obviously getting to the US by ship takes a long while. In fact, I use that time for uninterrupted work, and it's some of the most valuable time that I get. But he didn't perceive it as such. He perceived it as me skiving off, and taking overly long in getting to my destination. And it didn't amount to anything, but those were the reactions. But as I say, it wasn't really going to affect my career in the sense it wasn't going to stop me getting a job or anything like that. So my position is very different to some of the younger people who are on the panel who clearly do have that, as a major concern, whether if they do take these sorts of initiatives, it might be an impediment to their career progress, both, in and outside academia.
Yeah, Issy, do you have any direct experience of that then? Have you felt pressure to travel and to fly? And I'll come to William afterwards, because I think, William, you might have more because you've said you've actively not gone to New York for other conferences. But Issy first.
I think it's a really interesting one, and I think I have a slightly easier opinion here because I don't want to be an academic. So I'm looking at this thinking I want to go into industry. Which means that because of the way academia is structured, which rewards this sort of box ticking of going to lots of conferences and having, done lots of talks at different high profile events, if you don't want to then go and, try and get a postdoc position, it sort of frees you a little bit from that. But yeah, I mean, I have been invited to stuff in America that I just have sort of not shown interest in rather than declining. But yeah, it's a norm, definitely, that we sort of need to challenge. But I'd be interested to get Will's thoughts.
Yeah, so with me, it wasn't so much like I wasn't like specifically invited to it and I turned it down. It was just like someone I was collaborating with suggested I should go, and I just said not to I said I wouldn't for environmental reasons, and he was just like, "Oh yeah, that's fine." Like he had no problem with it. And my supervisor did, I think, want me to go a little bit, but part of my reasoning as well was I kind of thought like the research I would have presented, I wasn't particularly like proud of. Like it wasn't like important research. It was just like a side project I'd been doing. So I think that's a big part of it as well. Like, because where I work in climate science, I think there's this perception that that like maybe your research somehow offsets the carbon footprint of the flight, maybe because but I don't know, I don't really believe in the concept of offsetting, because when you're doing like actual measurable damage compared to some abstract negative thing. So yeah, but definitely the case that I had was I didn't feel it was that. But yeah, in terms of my career, I think like Izzy, like I'm not convinced I want to go into academia, like long term, maybe a little bit after my PhD, but not. I don't see myself becoming a professor or something. So I'm not as. So yeah, but I think even so, I think early on in your PhD, earlier on in your career, you're kind of. Yeah, it's less like it's not as important to go to these things. I think as you get later in your career, it's like I know people who in my field who are they're almost like linchpins of the field and they're like quite important. So kind of them going to conferences, I kind of understand more. But when you're just kind of this new starting out PhD student, it is a very kind of selfish, seems too mean a word, but it's like a kind of selfish thing to like to feel that you're the one that should have to do this. Yeah.
Interesting, Will. And so for both of you, Will and Izzy, because Andy mentioned that the perception of his colleagues was in some cases negative. So do you have something similar? Like how do others around you view your choice not to fly to those conferences or your active choice to travel by train? Will, do you want to go first?
Yeah. So I think it is quite similar to the kind of Nature article that was about this, of people kind of saying like they respect my decision to do it and think it's a good thing to do, but generally won't do it themselves. Like so there was a conference recently in Italy that quite a few people from my group went to, and I didn't go, not for any particular reason. Not because I couldn't have flown. Like I was actually looking, like had I gone, I was looking forward to the journey to Italy. But everyone in my group that went didn't fly. I think that you have to do over 2 days. No, sorry, they did fly. Aren't we said? But yeah, I would have not flown had I done it. But yeah, I'd say everyone else did. I've known one of my friends here at Cambridge who's in a different PhD group. I remember she once said that she had to visit someone in Sweden, like a collaborator, so she didn't fly. And then her doing that then inspired her to not fly when she came back the other way as well. So I think there's that effect as well of like people just kind of see you doing it and then think, oh yeah, that's a good thing to do.
Thank you. Yeah, great example. Izzy, do you have anything to add just there?
Yeah, I do think they think I'm a little bit crazy, but also it has opened other people's minds a little bit. So I did the first trip to Stockholm on my own, and then I went back to Gothenburg 2 years later, and I managed to get 3 colleagues to come with me, but I had to book it all, so that was the but also things like, so another conference was in Strasbourg, and some colleagues were looking at going to that, and it was like 2 changes on flights, like there wasn't a direct flight from Birmingham. So they thought, oh, well, we'll get the train. So they did. So it's got some positives and some negatives.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, we'll come back to the leading by example question. It's a really good point. Thank you from both of you. But Christine, can I just flip to you for a second? Because William mentioned that people are admiring of this, but they might not want to do it themselves. So in your experience, how can you encourage people to do this themselves, or can you?
I think I can't because I'm not the event organizer. I can, with my event in Belfast, the 7 of the participants were chosen from Northern Ireland for but the other 20, so we had 20 people, 7 were from Northern Ireland, everybody else apart from me and one other person flew to Belfast. And this is for a sustainability event where it's so sustainable that we're having vegetarian and vegan food for the whole 2 days, much to some people's astonishment at this. But the whole thing, a lot of them hadn't even realised there was a ferry from Belfast, from Liverpool to Belfast. A lot of them hadn't even considered that. So they said price was an issue because they've got to put it through in the expenses. But I don't actually think people had even thought the first thought, and that was me before 2018, I started looking at trains as options. And before then, I didn't even look at that as an option. And I would do a flight from Leeds to Amsterdam and then change and then go on to wherever I was going. So I guess some of it is just putting it in the forefront of people's minds. But secondly, it's also, I had to check when my client asked me to do this job in Belfast, I was like, okay, I'm going to check how possible it is to do that from Leeds, how long it's going to take, how much it's going to cost. And then I had to kind of go to them and say, it's going to cost this much. Is that okay? Because I charge my expenses as a business to them. And they were fine with that. But it's like, it is more expensive and I'm passing that cost on. Whereas other facilitators are quite happy to hop on a flight. So I am making myself less affordable. However brilliant I am, I'm more expensive.
That's interesting because we can maybe think about some of the ways that we can sell this more attractively, because you say it's more expensive, but they still said yes, that they would pay it. And I think a lot of the time people are reluctant to even ask because it's more expensive. But it's such a good thing. And you can say, this is sustainable and this is how much carbon is being saved by me traveling in this way. And people are very happy to tick that green box. So yeah, we can hopefully shine it up or hold it up as a sustainability advantage, which should be all the rage, and is in many cases, in many situations. Andy, I want to come back to you for a second because we mentioned the leading by example thing. So I wonder if you have had that direct experience of your example influencing others, or what are your general thoughts on that? And please unmute yourself.
Well, I can't say that I've certainly generated interest, and I've often had people come up to me, ask me, how do I do this? So I'm talking about the transatlantic travel now. But of course, that is quite complicated to organise. It'd be incredibly difficult to organise if you had to have a university administrator doing it for you, because they wouldn't know how to do it. And so, a lot of this stuff I've had to do off my own bat. As regards to train travel, though, I think I can definitely say that I've influenced some people, and the other people here who are traveling by train will be doing the same. And they're saying as much, in what they're reporting here. Other people are realizing that this is entirely possible and, importantly, relatively normal. And what I would add as well is I just received an invitation, or at least an advertisement, to a conference just the other day in Zurich. And in that, there are various incentives for people to travel by train. And there's even a prize for the person who manages to travel there with the smallest carbon footprint scaled to the distance that they've traveled. And so this sort of thing is creeping in. And for instance, I noticed when I was looking at the NERC, Natural Environment Research Council, grant booklet some years ago, before I applied for my present grant, in fact, which was from a different body. There are words in there about trying to promote sustainable travel within research contexts, whether they play a particularly significant part of decisions about whether you get funding and so on is another matter. But these things are becoming considerations, and they just need to become mainstream. They need to be, just people just need to do this and show that it's possible, and that it's not weirdos doing this, that it's just entirely normal. It is more expensive. This is one of the problems, but it's not so grossly expensive as Christine has said, that it gets turned down, and there are good reasons for it. And it's just awareness and so on and so forth. I mean, I know within my own university, when I went to a presentation by our travel department, where it was a new online system for doing travel bookings, and they gave as an example flying to Paris. And I was able to turn around and say to them, well, you should even be considering flying to Paris. You can get there perfectly easily on the train, probably just as quick, and certainly in a much greener way. And they were all a bit crestfallen and so on. But to me, that is the sort of thing that needs to be happening. It just needs to be people pointing out to administrators in that case and doing it. And setting that example that you referred to, and yes, I think I can genuinely say people have told me that they've travelled by train to various things, also for leisure purposes as well.
Yeah. Thank you. That's
so
good to hear, Andy, especially about the conference that's encouraging people to travel, and the kind of gamification of it, or the reward. It's brilliant. We'll try and encourage more of that. Thank you. Okay, so let's think about the practicalities, but also the benefits of real life conferencing. So we could just conduct everything online as we are now, and the benefits of this are that people can join us from all over the place. We don't have to travel at all. We can all benefit from the experience that we have on the panel, which is fantastic. People can dial in from all around the UK, and indeed from different countries around the world. But we can't ignore the fact that there are benefits to meeting in person. So, Will, would you like to, do you have any thoughts on the conferences that you have attended in person? Would it have been the same online, or what are those benefits to being there?
I think, there really are lots of benefits to going in real life, like being in person, because there are just things that happen at conferences that you don't get. Like, a lot of the kind of most important discussions you have can be like at lunchtime or something. Like, they're not part of the formal discussion, part of the formal like proceedings of the meetings. They just happen kind of spontaneously, or you go out for dinner afterwards and you meet someone brings someone else they know, and then you just start talking to someone you might not have met in another way. So I definitely think there are definitely benefits. So like whenever people can go to conferences and they're accessible without flying, I think it's always good to. And like, let's say, you still get some of it online. I know there's been things like the whole idea of a poster session that doesn't really work online. Like there is the website like Gather, which is kind of the similar idea, where you can kind of you kind of have a little avatar and you kind of walk around a kind of virtual thing. But most people I know like really don't like that and find it very awkward. And even poster sessions in real life can be a bit awkward. But that just, I think, amplifies it, because everyone's just sort of on edge a bit, just on their computer and that sort of thing. So I think there are definitely benefits, and you can that there is still value in online things. But whenever there's a conference in Europe, it's sort of like, I always think it's worth going to. Obviously there's some nuance to that, but in general it's worth going to. But they're still worth having in person.
Yeah, to be there. Okay, thank you. And Issy, do you feel the same? What's your experience?
I mean, we'll touch on a lot of the things I was thinking about, like Gather. I think a lot of the very worst online conferences I've been to, where people try to take how it works in person and just put that entirely online, which doesn't work. So you have to. But I've also been to some really good online meetings where people have thought about it, kept the sessions short, and then had like a little short like tea break with 4 people in your Zoom session. And And those have actually really worked really nicely, but it's really come down to how well the organizers thought about it. And I agree, there are some parts of in-person conferences that are really valuable, like the poster sessions and the networking sessions and those informal discussions that you get to have with people over a cup of coffee that you might find a lot more difficult to do online. But the only last point I wanted to make was just to bring up about justice and thinking about justice in who even gets to go to conferences, because, who gets to have these benefits, because it's inherently unequal between researchers in the global south and the global north as to who even has the opportunity to go to these with things like visas and cost travel. And we're very lucky as Europeans to have good rail networks, so we can go to this stuff in person with a low carbon footprint. Yeah, so some people might not have the opportunity to do this stuff in person, so online might be like a nice middle ground. That was just a final thought for you.
Thank you, Izzy. That's a really good point. We'll come back to you, Andy, in a second, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Just because I know that Christine has got so much to say here, because as you said, Christine, you do facilitate events that hopefully are as good as real life events, but online. So how do you do that, and how do you get those benefits with the online versions?
I think some of it always is a compromise. And I think, like Izzy raises a really important point there about actual participation rates. And I recently had to persuade a client that was thinking about doing a hybrid event that would essentially have thought everyone who could afford it and could get a visa come to London and be in person, and everyone else who's poor or can't get a visa would have joined online. I was like, that just seems like, given that you know that there's this divide in your community, why do that? Why not actually have it all online so that everyone, in a way, everyone has the bit that William was saying, actually, it's a bit awkward and it's a bit difficult, but let's all be in the same awkwardness about it. So I think sometimes when we talk about some of the in-person thing, we talk about it, we don't always think about everyone. So I was thinking about it and thinking, oh yeah, it is nice. I do like it when I'm in face-to-face, and I like that kind of that serendipity of just meeting someone and having a chat over a coffee. But equally, and this you'll be, I don't think a lot of people realize this as a facilitator doesn't mean that I'm hugely extrovert. So when I go to an event as a participant, I find it incredibly hard to kind of edge into those conversations and find that quite awkward. And in a way, the virtual setting I prefer, because someone boots me into a Zoom room and I have to have a conversation. I'm there with William and Izzy and they have to talk to me because they're in the Zoom room with me and they can't ignore me or turn their backs to me. And so we are forced into a conversation. And so there is some kind of serendipity there. So I would say in the events I run, very much like Izzy was saying, I spend a lot of time working with my clients, kind of starting with a blank sheet and figuring out what's needed in the day. I think one of the big challenges, and someone's written about that, is the time zone question, because when we all meet in a conference, we're all in the same time zone. But I was recently participating and helping with a global conference. So I was having to get up at 6 a.m, wake up my household at 6 a.m, so that I could go and join this session at 6:45 in the morning, because I was doing technical hosting for a global session. So it kind of disrupts my whole house. It's like I'm not in the right mood because it's first thing in the morning. I haven't had a decent cup of coffee. And some participants, it's the end of their working day. Some people, it's the beginning. Some are staying up until 2 a.m. And that's the difficulty, is that you can't stop your time zone in your house because you're joining a global conference. And I think that's one of the real challenges. In a virtual situation, you're all in the same time zone together. And I think that, to me, is one of the real advantages of it.
That's an interesting point. Thanks, Christine. And
you don't have to do your household chores either.
Brilliant. do you have kind of a tick list of what makes a good online conference? Because if you do, it'd be fantastic to share it with everybody at some point after the event. But yeah.
Oh, that sounds really polished, Anna. I don't have a classic tick list, but what I do is get people talking. One of the first things my clients often do when they say, "Can you facilitate this event?" is they send me their awful agenda. And their awful agenda is usually, we want a participative workshop. The first 50 minutes, no one's going to say anything. And so I will always subvert that and start putting in discussions and activities early on to get people talking to each other, turning the cameras on. Because right now I'm looking at most of you, you haven't got your cameras on. I can't kind of see if you're enjoying this, finding it boring. I've got no idea. So I kind of do things like that and look at, do we really need all these presentations? Do they need to be so long? Do we need to all watch them at the same time together? Or can we think about other ways of doing that? And can we maximize the time when we're gathered together virtually in these weird time zones? Can we maximize that for the conversations and shunt the presentations somewhere else and get rid of this idea that if I present to you with 26 PowerPoint slides, that's my job done.
Thanks. Good point, Christine. Very good. Very interesting to think about those things. Andy, do you want to come in with what you had intended to say? And you're still on mute.
To interrupt. I just wanted to endorse the point that was made about the diversity of attendance and the size of attendance that can come with doing things online. I wasn't intended to originally, but I've organised 2 online conferences as part of my current research project. Originally, they were going to be set up as sessions within large meetings, but it proved difficult to get slots for that. And it would have been difficult to get people to attend in person for a relatively small scale, somewhat specialist meeting. People are not going to travel halfway across the world to do that. So online was the obvious answer. And the other plus was that people, because we were able to make it cheap and open it to anybody effectively who's got an internet connection, we got a diverse and relatively large attendance, and we actually made it free to attend for people from lower and middle income countries. It didn't have to be a very big concession because it wasn't going to cost very much anyway. But those are distinct advantages. I got more people for both those events than I would have got had they been in person.
That's good to hear. Thank you, Andy. So we've almost answered this question already. Oh, actually, before we go to the next point, in about 5 minutes, we'll come to everybody for questions if you'd like to ask questions or share your experiences. And there is lots of chat in the chat at the moment, which is great. So if you want to keep doing that, that's good. I think people are answering each other's questions at the moment, which is always good, just sharing that wealth of experience. But yes, in 5 minutes, we'll come to the audience and hear what you have to say as well and what questions you have. But to our panel, we have kind of already talked about this a little bit. So the practicalities of sourcing that flight-free travel, if we are going to travel to places across Europe, because Europe is the easiest place to go, can we do that, and how can we do that more easily? Because we've already hinted at the difficulty in terms of booking travel through your institution or through your workplace. Often people haven't even heard of or consider how you might start booking rail travel when everybody else just books a flight. So I don't know. So William, do you want to share first? So when you traveled to Vienna, how easy or difficult was it to access that flight-free travel through your institution? Was it down to you to find it, basically?
Yeah, more or less down to me. I think my group is a bit weird with this, a bit different from PhD groups, but so the way I booked it, because I think like at the time when I was looking, this was cheaper, as I just got an Interrail ticket, because that's then only £180, and then that gets you there and back, and then you also have 2 spare days of travel if you want to have a little holiday as well while you're out there. And obviously you've got to book the Eurostar as well, which was £28 each way. like the seat reservation. So yeah, it was yeah, every time I've done that conference, that's how I've done that. And yeah, there is, and they're always willing to, because obviously it would be cheaper to fly, but my group have always been willing to pay the extra for me.
How do you persuade them to do that? Is it because they believe in the green aspect of it, or how does that work?
Yeah, I don't really need to explain. We're a climate change research group. Like I don't really need to explain it. Like
Yeah.
yeah, but then we do as like they wouldn't tell me to do it though, I don't think. Like I say, people in my group went to Italy for a conference, and I don't think any of them took the train. And then we collaborate with some people in Australia as well, and obviously you can't get there by train. But you but like I'd question how much they needed to go, really, as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think as well, so this is a bit of a tangent, but one point we touched on about like justice and things earlier, because I feel like that is the reason kind of climate change is important, like as a kind of social justice problem. And so often at this conference in Vienna, there's this group that help fund people from global south countries come to the conference. And I think that can be like, I think that's I don't think no one should fly ever. And I think that's like a very good reason to fly, to like get these kind of global south researchers to be like in the room where like of these conferences rather than just online. And yeah, like because they're often just left out of the conversation, but they're like almost the most important voices usually.
Yeah, good point. Thank you, William. Thanks for sharing that. Issy, how about you in terms of your experience of booking, practicalities, convincing people to pay the extra, that kind of thing?
So I'm really lucky as a PhD student that I have a grant that's just for me. So I have one that's like travel for just my travel. So in terms of like spending the extra bit of money, it's only me that kind of like I'm lucky that my supervisor supports it, and then I don't have to persuade anyone else that they should spend less money this year, because it only I can spend that pot. But in terms of the logistics of booking it, honestly, it's been an absolute nightmare booking it through the university.
Yes.
So we have a travel provider, which some of you might know, called Clarity, through which you can only book the Eurostar, or you can book flights, and you can't book beyond the Eurostar. So I think you can email them, and I have emailed them to get them to book Interrail tickets for me, but that all went horribly wrong, and they were so slow about it that I just ended up booking it all and requisitioning them, like putting in a cost and expenses form back. So something that would help that is if you could book international travel like through these like online systems, international rail tickets especially. And also if that was incentivized, like it's super easy on these systems to book a flight from Birmingham to Paris, when it would be just as easy to get the train, but just the whole booking it is so much more difficult that it incentivizes you to take that flight, which like nothing else incentivizes that really. Sometimes the cost is the same. So yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
But yeah, booking it for me personally, like is absolutely fine. I don't find that. It's just when you have to involve an institution and get their money back, it's an extra nightmare. Sorry.
Andy, do you have any thoughts on how that might change or something?
It might as well have been me talking there, you see, because I have exactly the same problems with the same travel agent as you, and it is a nightmare. And it's basically because they're travel agents, they want to do it as easily as they can, and the easiest option is just to go use various online facilities for getting cheap flights. And it is outrageously complicated. And I've had the same things as you, namely booked on the wrong trains, all that sort of stuff, being sent on the wrong reverse direction on trains, all sorts of crazy stuff. So the system, not in all universities. I have a colleague at Cambridge. I don't know whether this applies to Will actually, but I have a colleague at Cambridge who's able to book her own travel, which is what I would want to do, but I'm not allowed to if I'm spending my own university's money, which I am, when I'm spending my research grant money because it's administered through the university. So it creates immense problems, and they're just not geared up for it. And the mindset doesn't even exist within the university, let alone within Clarity Travel. Enough said.
Okay, thank you. Oh, this is a bit frustrating because, of course, we want to make this easier. Although let's come back to that concept of normalizing the concept of traveling without flying, because, and as you mentioned, Andy, the conference in Zurich, which is actively encouraging people to do that. And that is a result of people making this choice. So as painfully slowly as the progress seems, it does have an impact. And when we do choose this, we make it easier for the next cohort to make this choice as well. Shall we go to questions from our audience now? So I'm going to hand over to Nancy. And Nancy from the Flight for UK team. Hi, good evening. You've been monitoring the chat box all evening. So do we have any questions that you want to put specifically to our speakers, or do we have general questions that are coming up?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, speakers, for all your input so far. We've had lots of questions. So I've tried to pick out some that are particularly relevant, or a lot of people have asked similar ones, and just bear with me while I read through them because there are quite a few. Just following on from the conversation about clarity though, that has been mentioned in the chat a couple of times, and there was a question around booking through third parties, and universities tend to do that, have like a third party travel provider, and obviously Issy and Andy mentioned some of their frustrations with it, but one of the questions was, has anybody had any success doing that through either their university for conferences, or maybe Christine for sort of facilitating conferences? Maybe there might be a positive spin we could put on this. If anybody's got any positive experiences they could share. Feel free.
Christine's shaking her head.
No, not at all.
Well, the only positive experience is that it
travel.
happened.
Sorry, Andy, go first. And
No, I mean, ultimately it is achievable, but at an immense cost of time and effort. And I'm sure Izzy's had the same experience. You know, it's not geared up for it at the moment.
And I was going to say, I mainly book my own travel, fortunately, but sometimes the university insists they book the travel because then they don't have to get the VAT imposed, because I have to do it as a service and I have to put VAT on it. And they cannot get in their heads, I don't actually live at Leeds City Station, I live in Guiseley, and it's like they will never book me the ticket all the way through from Guiseley. So I get to Leeds late at night and I suddenly think, oh, I haven't got a ticket now for my onward train, which is only £5. But it's like, then I've got to sit with my app and get my train. And it's like, if they can't even get that right, getting me from Leeds to Italy, it's not going to happen, is it?
Can I just very quickly come in? Sorry to sort of dominate things a bit, but one of the reasons I think that universities do this, they subcontract it to travel agents, is because they can get blanket insurance cover. And so if things go wrong, and this I know from a field trip that went on at Derby, not one that I was involved with, and that was beneficial when they couldn't get back, from someplace in Africa, there was insurance cover. And so that is the excuse that they'll give you for this imposition of hassle.
I wonder,
thanks, guys.
with this and like clarity, if just if we could persuade more universities they need to do this, then like obviously universities are a big customer for them. So just like the fact that they would like I don't know if there's another person they can threaten to switch to, but that they would lose their custom if they don't make this easier.
But they must be able to do this because there are universities like Bath and like the Tyndall Centre at Manchester that have sustainable travel policies that encourage you to do this, and they must also use the third party. So there must be some kind of like flow chart that you have to start book through.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, a lot of people I know from Exeter always travel by train as well. So I don't know if they must do something as well.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. Okay, I'm going to go to a completely different question now, but just one that stuck out in my memory. Obviously, Andy, you've traveled quite far, flight free. You said you've got the cargo ship to America, and Issy and Will, it sounds like you guys mainly travel to Europe. What do you think generally is an acceptable amount of travel time before a week-long conference to be expected to take over ground rather than in a plane?
I think that probably depends on circumstances. Mine are different from the younger members of the panel, so perhaps they better go first and give their responses.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really depends. What does the travel mean to you? Like, and also what does a conference mean to you? So I went to most recently a conference in Gothenburg, and Gothenburg's about a day and a half from Birmingham on the train. Um, so I took a day and a half to get there. Um, and then on the way back, I wanted to do some interrailing through Europe, so I took 12 days to get home. Which obviously you could do much faster, but then if you had caring responsibilities, you'd need it to be as fast as possible. So I think it really depends. It really depends.
Yeah, I think I would say that as well. I've always kind of where I typically will try kind of like make a holiday of like the return journey or out there as well. And yeah, and it depends, like you say, it depends as well. Like I think you have to weigh this up of how much you want, how important going to the conference is as well. Like, so yeah, it will really vary. Like I probably wouldn't like I was going to go to Italy and that would have been 2 days, I think. And it will vary. And as you can also do it if like taking night trains kind of almost like speeds up the journey because you like are asleep while it's happening. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Thanks, guys. I don't want to leave Christine out as somebody who's predominantly organising rather than attending the conferences. So I've got questions specifically for you, Christine. Well, there's a couple that related to organising international conferences. Have you had any experience with issues around juggling time differences? And then also on the flip side, do you have any experience with local hub conferences, such as watch parties? I think I have a rough idea of what watch parties are, but if you need any clarification, please feel free, whoever asked that question, to put it in the chat.
So the time zone question, I think, as I indicated, is really tricky. And it's finding out where are your participants from. And the worst case scenario is they're stretched, they're either end. And it is virtually impossible to find a slot that works when you have to go as far as my arms are. And that's the reality, because there is not a slot when people they're usually asleep. So the best we end up doing is, because it's usually the UK that's hosting, and so we will often hit the sweet spot is around 11 and 2. And we do kind of an hour and a half, take a good break, and then do another hour and a half. And so we manage to do a 3-hour event in the middle of the day. And the timing is fine for the UK, and it works but I have had people joining from their bathroom in Canada with the lights out, trying not to disturb their household because it's 4 o'clock in the morning because they're in the far end. Yeah. And it's like, that takes a lot of dedication, and they're not always 100% present, understandably. So you've got that going on, then you've got other people at the other side who are kind of getting quite tired. So I don't, to answer that question, Nancy, there isn't a definitive answer. It is tricky. The hub question has come up, and I think the whole hybrid thing is, we all take a deep breath. Can you hear that in my team when someone says they want to do a hybrid event? Because it's like, it is so complicated. It is multiplied by 3 in terms of fees, time it takes, because you've got to design 2 processes, one for virtual, one for in person. And a hub is bringing all of that together, but with the logistics of having to have a venue in each place and having to have someone managing that venue in each place. So actually, logistically, we've talked about it, but I've never been involved with that because I haven't got a client with that kind of budget control of the space. Actually getting hybrid spaces to work is really, really tricky. So yeah, for all of those reasons, we use hybrid in a very limited way when the client's got enough budget and there's a real reason to have it hybrid. But otherwise we go either in person or virtual only and have it in one dimension. So
another question that popped up in the chat that might follow on nicely from that is the idea around having, I guess, organizationally, it would increase things, having sort of time zone hubs to organize maybe European sort of conferences on that time zone, so it makes the parameters a bit like narrower in terms of when people need to log on. Have you seen any of that happening?
I participated in that the other week, and it was a complete disaster for me. I was a terrible participant because I think partly I just hadn't realised that I hadn't read the agenda properly. I hadn't clocked the time zones. So there were some European timed sessions, and I hadn't really clocked that they were exactly when I was never going to be available, because I was doing some stuff for my elderly parents that day. So it was on a Saturday. So I couldn't make the sessions because the other ones were impossible for me to make time-wise. So it was a really interesting experience because it was a 3-day event. But actually, a lot of the sessions I just physically couldn't attend because I'm not a fan of getting up at 2 a.m. to rock up to a conference event. So I kind of had a real insight into how hard it is as a participant to really understand the implications of time zones as a participant.
That's really interesting. That's almost made things more difficult by doing it sort of in a more local time zone than doing it globally. Mm-hmm. Thanks, Christine. I've got a bit of a spicy question now, which anybody can jump in on if you feel bold enough to answer. It was asked whether or not you feel like academia in general are reluctant to cut conferences that include sort of glitzy, glamorous flights and hotels because they're seen as a bit of a perk of the job.
Can I just say, as an observer on this?
Yeah, go on.
People love it. They love they love like nice hotel, send photos. It's like, I'm sorry, but my sense is that is it is seen as a bit of a perk by some people, but for others it's a real cost in terms of they can't do it because they've got childcare responsibilities, or as I've got elderly parents who are relying on me for their care. So it's actually it's one of those things. Who are we listening to when we talk about, oh yeah, conferences in person are really great and we love all the perks and benefits? Who gets those benefits? I don't think it is everyone.
Very good point.
Yeah, I'd agree with that as well. I think like sometimes as well, people do just sort of use conferences as an excuse for like a bit of a piss up as well. Like they're not they're not always about just, like it is, they say, a perk of the job. I think as well, it makes people feel very important as well that they're having to like go out to these faraway places. I've had a similar thing as well where people have kind of suggested that like if we're doing a conference that's about climate change and I suggest, oh, maybe we shouldn't serve meat, people are like, oh, well, they've come to Cambridge, they expect good food, we have to give them meat, like that sort of thing as well. So yeah, I think it's a similar thing. But I think you can still have that effect with going by train as well, just less often, I think.
Yeah,
and
similarly, to add to this, I think this is one of my biggest bugbears is these destination conferences that where they choose, so if you choose a Central European location or you choose somewhere that, is accessible on a train node, maybe somewhere in the US, so people don't have to fly there, it makes it a lot easier to have a low carbon imprint. But when you choose somewhere that's literally an island, like in the middle of the Pacific, or like an island, like somewhere like Hawaii, it's really difficult. And people want to go there because it's exciting and it's cool and it's really nice to say, oh, I went to a conference in Hawaii. But again, there's the whole justice issue of who gets to go there because it's so far. Nobody cannot not fly there. So I think it is sort of here to stay. But then I almost feel like the planet might have other ideas, especially with locations like Hawaii. So hopefully, yeah.
If I can just add to that, it's not just the locations as well. It absolutely staggers me that when people are organizing conferences, which are, just in terms of getting there, expensive and obviously the large carbon footprint, often the accommodation is really extravagant and the food is really extravagant as well, utterly unnecessarily so. So, which endorses or underlines the point about it being in some way a sort of a perk, I don't go for that at all personally, but there we are. That's the fact of the matter.
Increasing the carbon footprint of the event, in fact.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Great, thanks, guys. Somebody asked a question directly to Anna. Are you happy to answer a question, Anna?
Yeah, go ahead.
Nice. Okay, great. So it was mentioned that sometimes having conversations in like large organizations that maybe might be stuck in their ways or used to a certain way of doing things can be a difficult conversation to have. And they were asking for advice on how to lead these conversations and if there are any resources from Flight Free, such as a toolkit that could be used.
Yeah, well, that's a good idea. And actually, using the expertise in this meeting, I think would be really good to put together a toolkit. So we don't have a toolkit that's specific for how to run events and reduce flights, but we do quite a lot of work with institutions. And for example, just last week I was at UCL talking to some of the academics there, and there were quite a few ideas of how to work together better. And there are, I mean, we've already mentioned the University of Bath and the University of Exeter. So there are examples of where people are doing things in a sustainable way, but putting measures in place that can be then used in other areas by other groups, industry, academia, etc. So yeah, that would be really useful, wouldn't it, if we could put together kind of a sort of like a toolkit and take that best practice from each of those institutions. And there are also, it's not just academic institutions, there are plenty of industries that are also that have very positive sustainable travel policies. So thank you for the suggestion. I will work on that and hopefully publish something soon that can be used as a bit of a toolkit.
Amazing. Thanks, Anna. And I think leading on from that, I saw a question earlier, which is open to everybody. Has anybody experienced any success stories with respect to influencing university travel policy? Anybody seen any significant changes either across their career or even while just studying?
Shall we have this one as the last question? So if there's anything you want to add as well, that kind of as final thoughts from each of our contributors, that would be brilliant. And then we can wrap up. Thanks, Nancy.
No problem. Okay, so another one, which I think there was a lot of discussion about going to America earlier on in the chat, and people sharing information and resources about how to get there. Maybe Andy could answer this one. Is there a climate-friendly way to get to the USA at the moment?
Yes.
Do you think?
No, is the answer. And I'm looking into it and was looking into it very recently with a friend of mine who I travelled back from the US with, who's very much of the same mind as me. And we've pursued various options, including one with Anna actually earlier this year, where we had a meeting with what you might describe as a shipping agent to discuss the options for effectively getting more people onto ships in a more sort of budget mode of transport, more of a mass mode of transport rather than, ocean liners or anything like that. And yes, and it's not so outrageously expensive, and it could be done, but nevertheless, it's going to be much more expensive than flying, and it's not, of course, the ideal green option. I've also, and I won't go into it at any length because it's a very distant prospect. Looked into the prospect of and other people have looked into the prospect of building large sailing ships to get across the Atlantic, and it is actually possible now to go across the Atlantic by ship. I mean, obviously Greta Thunberg did it, but it's actually possible to do it. But these are niche kind of options at the moment. They're not mainstream ones. And regrettably, I mean, what I used to do on the container ships was, of course, relatively green in the sense that the ship's going anyway, taking 25,000 tons of cargo or something like that, and my presence obviously isn't adding anything to the carbon footprint, but of course it's only taking me and perhaps 2 or 3 other people, and so it needs to be some other option to be something for mass transit, and even that option it no longer exists. So the only option for getting across by ship that is, reasonably simple to organise is to go on the QM2 at the moment.
Yeah.
Can I ask quickly, how long does it take? I have no idea how long it takes to cross the Atlantic in a ship.
Yes, well, by container ship, it used to take me 9 days, and on the QM2, it took 6. Now, coming back to the time thing, for me, that's really useful time. And my colleague Anthony, like me, is working like hell the whole time, using the opportunity of being, fed, watered. You can go to the gym, you can sleep, and all the rest of it, and just have all your basic needs taken care of, and then you can get on with your work, and that's what I do. But there's downsides to it as well, of course.
Yeah.
I think
Thanks,
the other point to note here is that, we need to fly less. And if you think that it's really worthwhile going to a conference and there is no other way than to fly, and that's worthwhile, then, it's worth making the most of those emissions and then trying your very best to minimize them in other ways. I'm basically trying to say that we should, if you really think it's worth it, it's also worth owning the emissions and saying, I think that this conference is worth it. Because sometimes it is unbelievably difficult. Yeah.
Good point. Yeah. And then I've got one more slightly left field one from Old Tech of
Oh, sorry, Nancy. This is actually, we're going to have to finish now. So, but going back to the previous question that you asked before the crossing the Atlantic one, I think that was a really nice one to finish on. So shall we hear, I can't remember what it was, if you could ask it again, and then we can get final thoughts from William and Christine as well. That'd be great.
Yeah, sure. So it was asked whether there were any success stories that anybody had experienced with respect to influencing university travel policy, or I guess any changes that you've seen in a positive direction over the course of your career or your time studying.
If we can possibly answer that in 30 seconds each, that would be brilliant. Thanks, everyone.
So I think the best thing to do is when you do one of these journeys, like when I did my Belfast trip, I wrote about it and I did a beautiful edit on it, and I can then share it on LinkedIn, and then that just shares the story. And I think that's the best way, is us sharing our stories and just saying, this is the mechanics of it. This is what it takes. This is how long it takes. This is why it's bearable to take that longer time.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that as well. That like whenever I'm traveling, I'm always just like posting it all over my Instagram stories, because like maybe it annoys some people, but a lot of people do tell me it's like, oh, like that's very, like, people have told me that like it's interesting to watch. And then not not me, but I know someone else at Cambridge who their research group now have an official policy where like a sustainable research policy that includes like only providing plant-based catering, but then also for travel, they do allow kind of flights in certain instances, but it's things like first year PhD students can't do it. And it's like later on in your PhD, you kind of are able to do these things, like even, well, for first year PhDs, I think it's no travel at all. And then it's like kind of increases the amount of travel you're allowed to do. And yeah, and then I've heard of like similar things, like I think ETH Zurich have some quite good policies on it about like you have to like pay the university money if you want to fly somewhere, basically, and then they use that fund for like sustainable things. So they once used it to like set up a conference hub for an American conference as well.
Any more final thoughts? I'll go on, Nancy. Sorry. Yeah.
Well, I'd just say, I think, in some way to do more, make more than local influence, on one's friends and, people one's got reasonably close contact with. One has to somehow persuade universities that it's good for their image. And clearly there are a couple of universities who've bought into this, and one would like to know how they've been persuaded and why other universities haven't, and are, notionally perhaps saying that they'll do this, but I know, and other people have said from their own experience, it's very, very difficult. But clearly some universities have been persuaded. So basically you have to sort of sell them the idea that they can greenwash themselves a little bit. and get some. Well, that's the realistic. That's the outlook that the university will have. They'll look to see whether they can benefit from adopting these policies, and if they can see that greenwashing is a benefit to them, then we might make some progress.
Thank you, Andy. Issy, do you have
It's
anything
cynical.
final to add?
No, it's been a really interesting, nuanced discussion, and yeah, thanks everyone for all your contributions.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I thought actually what you said, Issy, about really consider if you need to do the travel, and if so, just own it. I think that's a really good point. Nice way to finish. So thank you everybody for attending. I think in conclusion, we would say, yes, we need to do everything a lot less, which includes a lot less travel, definitely a lot less air travel, trying to exchange that air travel for overland travel where we can. But actually, do we need to go to all these conferences to start with? So if we can reduce the amount we're doing things, replace most of that, the leftovers, with overland travel, and then if we really need the air travel, then there might be some room left in the carbon budget for it. But I want to say thank you so much to our contributors this evening, and thanks Nancy for running our question and answer session. It was brilliant. So thank you William, thank you Issy, thank you Christine, and thank you Andy for being our experts and for sharing your expertise and experiences with everybody. Thank you everyone for attending. Thank you so much. We run these events every couple of months. We do a different topic every time, so please keep an eye on the Flight Free UK social media for notifications of the next one. So we're across Twitter, I'm still calling it Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, if you want to keep up to date with our next events and indeed generally our work. So thank you so much for supporting Flight Free UK. Thank you to our contributors. Thank you for attending, and stay safe everybody. Good night.